Greetings Internet and welcome to Parsing John. This will be the second video in our walk through verses 1 through 5 of chapter 1. Today we are doing the Latin version pulled from the Vulgate. I have the rubric here on this page, but we'll get to that in just a moment. First, a bit about the difference between the Greek and the Latin here. I'm going to use an analogy to give you an idea. So the Greek is the oldest copy of the biblical text that we have. It is the original for almost all of the books of the Bible. There's a theory that a few of them were written originally in Aramaic and then translated. We, of course, don't have any of those texts that have survived, which is very unfortunate. Now, the relation between Greek as an original text versus Latin is kind of like reading this text here from the Vulgate would be roughly equivalent to reading something like the NIV or the ESV translation. For those of you who lived a lot of your life in the past century, you may remember TVs which had bunny ears. What you can picture the Vulgate as compared to the Greek is the Vulgate is watching the story of Christ on an old black and white television using bunny ears. So the signal is not always very clear. You frequently have to adjust it in order to actually see what's happening. Going to the Greek is like watching the same thing on an HD TV. Much, much clearer. So we're going to be going through today verses 1 and 2 in this 5-verse section. And our next video will be taking Greek in 3 to 4, and we will be doing it alternating between the two, Greek and Latin, until we're done with this section. And then when we finish the final section of Latin, which is probably going to be just verse 5 all by itself, we're going to take both of the texts together and compare them to see how the Latin shows up to its Greek counterpart. Now, on to our rubric. This is what we're going to be looking for when parsing each Latin word. For nouns and adjectives, we're looking for the case, the number, the gender, and for the adjectives, where it is applicable, the degree of the adjective. We have nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, and vocative. We have singular and plural, masculine, feminine, and neuter, and then, of course, positive, comparative, and superlative for the adjectives. Verbs, we're looking for the person, the number, the tense, the voice, and the mood. We have 3 persons, 2 numbers, 6 tenses, only 2 voices. There are very, very few Latin verbs that will appear in the middle voice. And if we come across one and I recognize it, I'll point it out to you. And then we have the moods, indicative, subjunctive, infinitive, imperative, and of course the participle. Adverbs, we're also looking for degrees when it is applicable. Otherwise, we'll just do the meaning. Conjunctions and anything in any other type of word, we will just generally translate what it means directly. Prepositions, we're going to write down what case the preposition takes in its object. All right, so I'm going to slide the rubric up here. Visible. Now, first things first, we need to read the text aloud. In principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud Deum, et Deus erat verbum, hoc erat in principio apud Deum. And that's as far as we're going to go in this video, because that finishes off verse 2. So first thing you want to do whenever translating a text from another language into English, especially if it's Greek or Latin, is you want to go and you want to find the verb first. The verb will tell you what you are looking for in the subject. And then once you find the subject, that clears up all of the rest of the text for you to easily take it apart piece by piece from that point on. All right, so here we go. We don't have any punctuation in this, which is unfortunate, but we'll deal with it just fine. So, in principio, that's a prepositional phrase. It's not a verb, but we're going to block it off with parentheses so we can set it aside to do after we finish this main clause. And erat, here we come across our first verb. There's not really an easily distinguishable ending here because it is a linking verb and therefore irregular. It comes from sum esse fui futurus. So this one is going to be from the imperfect, eram, eras, erat. So it's third, and it is singular, and it is imperfect. It's going to be active and indicative, so no special clauses going on there. Now this verb tells us that we are looking for a singular subject, and since we're not in Greek, we don't have the issue where sometimes a neuter plural noun can take a singular verb. We don't have to deal with that at all in Latin. Latin is a far more regular in that regard. All right, prepositional phrase cannot be our subject. Our clause technically ends at this conjunction right here. So verbum is the only option as our subject. Take a look at it, and it's got the ending which could make it either accusative singular, masculine or neuter, or nominative singular, neuter. Knowing our vocabulary, we know that this word is actually neuter, and we want a singular subject. Participial phrase, not participial phrase, I'm sorry. Prepositional phrase cannot be the subject, which leaves verbum as our only option. So we've got singular and, writing it out of order, nominative neuter. This means was. This means word. Now we can come back to our prepositional phrase. I keep making that mistake. And we can take it apart. So the preposition in takes either the accusative or the ablative. When it is taking the accusative, it usually means that we're having motion coming from one location into or onto another location. If it's the ablative, that it's generally a stationary situation. So we take a look at principio to actually get the appropriate case that in takes, and we see it's got an O here, which means that principio is ablative, and therefore the preposition in is taking the ablative case. It's going to be ablative and singular, and then we would have to know the dictionary entry for this word to be quite sure of what gender it actually is. And I think, and I could be wrong here, but it is going to be neuter. And this means in beginning. Now, technically, there are no articles in Latin, so if I wanted to make the sentence flow better in English, I can, in most circumstances, stick an article, either definite or indefinite, in there, and for our English speakers' sake. I'm not going to, and that has entirely to do with the Greek. The Greek in this section doesn't have an article, so I'm also going to leave the article out. All right, our first clause is, in beginning was word. And verbum, we have a repetition of the form here. So we look ahead, we've got a prepositional phrase here, which we're going to block off conjunction. That next word does not match deum, so the prepositional phrase ends here. We only have the one word that could be our subject, so again, verbum here is going to be nominative, not accusative, to match erat, repetition of our previous verb. And word was. Apud deum. Now we can do our prepositional phrase. And apud here is going to take the accusative. We have so plus accusative. And deum is therefore going to be accusative. And we know it's singular. And since this is the word for God, it can't be neuter. It can either be feminine or masculine. And since this is the Bible, and since we know this word deus, dei, we know it's going to be masculine, not feminine. All right, now apud is going to be the troublesome word here, if you will. In most English texts, when we come across this line, this part of the phrase right here is translated with. It's translated with. Now, in Latin, if we wanted to say with, we would use the preposition cum. Now, clearly, that is not cum. Likewise, in Greek, if we wanted to say with, normally we would use the words either, just learned how to spell, meta or soon. Both of those, with the appropriate case, can mean with. We don't have cum, we don't have a Greek word in here, of course. Instead, this one means before. And with is kind of like the idea we have here with the word before, but they are not exactly the same. Moving on. Conjunction and deus. We got our word here again. This time it's got an us ending, which is the nominative, and it is singular. masculine. God. Repetition of erat again was verbum here. It's not going to be accusative because the linking verb does not take an accusative direct object. It can only take a nominative subject with a prepositional phrase. Well, I shouldn't say only, but in clauses like this, it can take a nominative subject with a prepositional phrase or a nominative subject with a predicate nominative. And that's what we have here in verbum. Forgot how to spell it for a moment. So, let's get a repetition of this. God was word. Okay, verse 2. Here we have a demonstrative, and a demonstrative has to have an antecedent somewhere before it, or a the noun which it modifies in the same sentence in English. In Latin, we don't always have to have a noun there. Frequently in Latin, they'll just throw out a adjective or something like this, and we call this a substantive use of the word, where it stands in the place of the noun. And this can be quite frustrating for a English speaker because we don't like sentences. We don't even understand sentences that go something along the lines of this. This came into the house. But what is this? We want to know. So in English, we can include a word in here when we translate from another language to clarify a little bit. But in order to do that, we need to know what it refers back to. And hoc here has to refer back to the word which it matches in number and gender. And the form of this one is not masculine, which would refer back to deus, but it is neuter. How do we know this? Well, we go to our forms of this demonstrative, and they are, yes, that is visible. Hic, hike, hoc. And there's hoc right there, the neuter form. Hoc can either be nominative or accusative singular, and as we look at the sentence before us, we've got a prepositional phrase here. New preposition means this one closes, beginning of a new verse, so this prepositional phrase stops right there. Hoc is the only word that can be the subject, therefore it has to be the nominative singular form. And this would mean this. And the word we would stick in here for it to make the most sense is going to be the word one. Okay, why one and not, well, anything else? Because we have a actual person here. God was word. This is a real being. So we wouldn't say this thing. That would be only talking about something that is not a human being or, say, an animal. So we want to use the word one for clarity in English. Got a repetition of erat here, so don't need to parse it. This one was, and now we can do our prepositional phrases. There's got a repetition of this prepositional phrase here. Don't need to parse it again. Just translate it the exact same way. In the beginning. And apodem, another repetition. Before God. Period. Now our translations from the beginning so far is, in beginning was word, and word was before God, and God was word. This one was in beginning before God. Now, if we wanted a cleaner translation of this text, then we would start sticking articles in there to clarify things in English, which if you want to do on your own, you can. I'm not going to. I'm not looking for a good, like a clear translation, if you will. This is for practice to get a closer look at what the text actually says, not what English would like it to say. So that's the end of these verses. Our next video is going to be going back to the Greek text, where we're going to look at verses 3 and 4, possibly 5 if we have time. And then after that, we're going to return to the Latin, where we'll go through the same. The final video in this bit of the series is going to be taking the Latin text and comparing it to the Greek text. I hope looking through this passage has been as useful for you as it has been for me, and I hope you all have a good day.